He looked me straight in the eyes, right there at the altar, with the priest waiting, our families watching, and whispered, "I still love her." Just like that. No hesitation, no shame. He didn't say it loud. He didn't shout. But he didn't need to. Because when someone destroys your world, they don't need to raise their voice. They just need to stop pretending. It took me a second to breathe. I blinked. I blinked again. And for that split second, I wondered if I misheard him. If my mind, overwhelmed by the dress, the music, the weight of 1,000 expectations, had imagined it. But no. He said it again, slower. "I still love her." In that moment, time stopped. Everything around me, the candles, the murmurs, the eyes locked on us, froze. But inside, something shattered. Not my heart. No. That would come later. What broke first was the illusion, the carefully built fantasy that this was real, that love was enough, that I was enough. I looked at his hands holding mine. I looked at the ring that was supposed to seal a promise, not a lie. And I said nothing, not because I didn't want to scream, not because I didn't want to run, but because I had finally seen the truth, and truth has its own silence. If you're watching this right now, I want you to pause for just a second. Take a deep breath, and in the comments, tell me, where are you watching this from? Because I want to know how far this story travels. I want to know how many people have stood where I stood, at the edge of something beautiful, only to realize it was built on sand. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That moment at the altar? That was the unconscious made conscious. It was everything I refused to see finally staring me in the face. And the thing is, I think part of me always knew. We always know, don't we? We just bury it. We dress it up. We give it excuses. We call it stress or work or he's just tired lately. But truth doesn't stay buried forever, and when it rises, it doesn't knock. He said he still loved her. And in return, I gave him his ring back. No screaming, no begging, just a slow, steady movement. I slid the ring off my finger and pressed it into his palm like a gift. Because it was, really, a gift of clarity, a gift of release. You see, the moment I gave the ring back, I wasn't just ending a wedding. I was ending a cycle, a pattern of self-abandonment, of ignoring the whispers inside me that said, "This isn't love, this is performance." So many of us live in performance. We smile when we want to cry. We stay when we want to run. We say yes when everything inside us is screaming no. And that's not loyalty, that's fear. That's the shadow side of love, what Carl Jung called the rejected self. The parts of us we exile so we can be accepted. I had exiled so much of myself just to get to that altar. I ignored the red flags, the late nights, the coldness, the way he flinched when I said, "I love you." I told myself stories to fill the gaps. I told myself he was overwhelmed, that he needed time, that he would come around. But deep down, I knew he was somewhere else, that his heart was not mine to keep. When he said, "I still love her," I realized I had spent so long trying to win a love that was never meant for me. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt something far more terrifying, peace. Because when you see the truth, when you finally stop lying to yourself, peace comes. It's not loud, it doesn't celebrate. It just stands beside you, silently, like an old friend who's waited patiently for you to come home. And that's what this story is really about. It's not about betrayal. It's not even about him. It's about coming home to myself. It's about recognizing that I had betrayed me long before he ever did, that I said yes to a life that was too small, too quiet, too dishonest. People always ask me why I didn't scream, why I didn't slap him, why I didn't walk out and let the doors slam behind me. But the thing is, silence can be louder than rage, and some exits don't need drama, they need dignity. When I gave that ring back, I didn't just return metal. I returned the version of myself that thought she had to beg for love. I buried her right there in front of everyone. And maybe they didn't see it. Maybe they just saw a woman in a dress, standing too still, but inside I was moving mountains. Afterwards, people avoided eye contact. They whispered. They looked at me like I was made of glass. But I wasn't. I was steel. Because there's something about being shattered that makes you invincible. Once you survive your greatest fear, what's left to fear? Carl Jung believed that every crisis is an opportunity for transformation, that the breakdown is not the end, it's the beginning. And standing there in that dress, with mascara running down my face and silence hanging in the air like smoke, I knew this was my beginning. I left that church without a husband, without a celebration, without the future I had imagined. But I also left without illusions, without pretense, without the heavy armor of denial, and that made me lighter than I'd ever been. What followed wasn't easy. There were nights I screamed into pillows, days I couldn't eat, moments when I doubted everything, especially myself. But each of those moments was a step out of the shadows. Each breakdown was a breadcrumb leading me back to myself. You don't walk away from a moment like that unchanged. You don't just go back to work on Monday like nothing happened. You either collapse or you awaken, and I chose to awaken. And awakening, as Jung taught, is messy. It's not a straight line. It's not a single epiphany with a choir singing in the background. It's 1,000 small deaths. It's realizing that most of your suffering came from the lies you told yourself. That you stayed because you were afraid of your own power. We don't talk enough about that, do we? About how terrifying our power can feel? About how we sabotage ourselves because rising would mean losing everything familiar, even if that familiarity is pain. When I stood at the altar, I was terrified of being alone, terrified of what people would say, terrified of the shame, but none of those fears were louder than the truth. And once the truth speaks, it becomes impossible to ignore. People say time heals everything. I don't believe that. I think time numbs. I think truth heals. Radical, raw, unapologetic truth. And sometimes that truth doesn't come gently. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper at the altar. The moment he said, "I still love her," he gave me the greatest gift he could have given. He freed me from a life that wasn't mine, from a future built on borrowed love, from a performance I didn't even realize I was part of. And so, I gave the ring back. The thing about silence is that it echoes. It doesn't end when you stop speaking. It stretches. It follows you home. It curls up beside you in bed. It sits across from you at the table. And for a while, it haunted me. Every room I walked into felt like that church. Every face I saw carried the shadow of judgment, and yet, somewhere within that silence, I found my own voice. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, a whisper of something I had buried long ago, a part of me I had muted to survive, but now, with nothing left to perform, I could finally hear her. She said, "You're still here," and that shook me, because in all the chaos, in all the devastation, I forgot I existed beyond him, beyond us. I forgot that I was not just a bride left behind. I was a woman still standing, still breathing, still worthy of something true. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That sentence became my compass. I didn't know what truly me looked like. I had built myself around the idea of being chosen, of being lovable, of being the one. But Jung's words told me I didn't have to be chosen to exist. I already did. I already was. So I started small. I started by reclaiming my mornings. No more checking my phone for his messages. No more waiting. I started walking alone, making coffee exactly how I liked it. Playing the songs I loved, but never played around him because he said they were too emotional. One morning I sat in my living room with sunlight pouring through the windows, and I realized I hadn't cried in days. That mattered. That wasn't nothing. That was life returning. I wrote a letter to myself. It said, "You are not hard to love. You just tried to bloom in the wrong soil." And I read that letter every day, not because I didn't believe it, but because I was learning to. See, we think healing is this epic transformation, this dramatic butterfly moment. But healing is subtle, it's quiet, it's saying no when you used to say yes, it's laughing without feeling guilty. It's noticing your own breath and not wishing it belonged to someone else. I started therapy. I started writing. I started having conversations with women who had lived similar stories, and in each conversation I heard echoes of myself, different names, different faces, same ache, same silence, same desperate question. Was I not enough? But here's what Jung teaches us. The question isn't, was I enough for him? The real question is, was he ever enough for me? And when I asked that honestly, without fear, I felt my spine straighten. I felt something old crack and something new rise. I had settled for fragments. I had begged for crumbs. I had built castles on conditional love and called it commitment. But now I was learning the truth. Love doesn't make you small. Love doesn't leave you begging. Love doesn't make you doubt your worth every morning. Real love, rooted love, stands with you in the fire, and if it leaves, it doesn't whisper confessions at the altar. It comes with honesty, long before vows are written. There was this one night, a few weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. I was alone in my apartment, no makeup, wearing one of his old shirts I hadn't thrown away yet. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked broken, but because I looked alive. There were no smiles, no filters, just raw, tired, awakened eyes, and in that reflection I saw all the versions of me that had stayed silent for too long. The little girl who thought love meant sacrifice. The teenager who apologized for everything. The young woman who thought being chosen was the highest achievement. And I whispered to them, "You don't have to perform anymore." That night, I burned the shirt. I opened all the windows. I played every too emotional song at full volume. I danced like my body was mine again, because it was, because it always had been. I had just forgotten. Carl Jung talked a lot about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny or suppress. For me, the shadow was the part of me that wanted more, the part that wasn't satisfied with lukewarm affection, the part that demanded truth even when it hurt. I had buried her deep because I thought she was too much, but it turns out she was the only part of me that truly loved me. So I brought her back. I let her speak. I let her scream. I let her write pages of truth I never dared say out loud. And slowly, I stopped being afraid of her. I stopped being afraid of my own intensity, my own standards, my own boundaries. You want to know the most radical thing I did after that day at the altar? I chose myself. Not in the self-help book kind of way, not in the spa day, bubble bath, take a break kind of way. I mean, I chose my reality. I chose to live in truth, even when it burned. I chose to stop performing, to stop proving, to stop chasing. I stopped responding to people who only reached out when they were bored. I stopped saying, "It's okay," when it wasn't. I stopped attending events that drained me. I stopped letting guilt run my life. And with every no I spoke, a deeper yes rose in me. A yes to peace, a yes to quiet joy, a yes to friendships that felt like exhale, a yes to the woman I was becoming. There's this quote I love. It says, "You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." For most of my life, I thought burning was love, that if I hurt enough, bent enough, sacrificed enough, I'd be worthy. But now I know, love that costs your soul isn't love. It's a transaction, and I'm no longer for sale. So if you're here, if you're still listening, if some part of this echoes in you, I want you to do something. Right now. In the comments, tell me, what part of you have you silenced to keep the peace? And what would it feel like to let her speak? Because you deserve to be heard, not just by others, by yourself. And if you're scared, that's okay. Growth is terrifying. Truth is disorienting. But you don't have to do it all at once. Just start with a whisper. Start by not apologizing for needing more. Start by looking in the mirror and saying, I'm still here. I'm still here. That sentence became my anchor on the hardest days, on the nights when grief wrapped itself around me like a second skin, when I missed the version of him I had imagined, when I craved the comfort of denial. I would whisper, I'm still here. And it was enough to get through the night. Carl Jung believed that within our deepest wounds lie the seeds of our transformation, that the place of our greatest pain is also the place of our rebirth. And I clung to that. Because I didn't want this story to end at the altar. I wanted it to begin there, and it did. Healing didn't look like I expected. It wasn't a straight line, and it definitely wasn't graceful. Some days I felt powerful, unstoppable, like I had finally cracked the code of my own worth. And other days, I woke up missing the version of myself that used to believe in the illusion. Missing the safety of pretending everything was okay. Because here's something they don't tell you about waking up. There's grief in it. You grieve the lies. You grieve the comfort of denial. You grieve the old you who didn't know yet. Sometimes ignorance really does feel like bliss, until you realize it's not. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. I was walking past a bakery we used to love, and I caught a glimpse of a couple through the window, laughing, feeding each other bites of cake. For a second, I felt bitterness rise up in my throat like bile. Why them? Why do they get that? Why did I get a whisper at the altar? But the bitterness didn't stay, because right behind it came compassion, not for them, for me. For the girl who once thought love had to be earned, for the woman who now knew better. I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. That moment, though so small, felt like a turning point, like maybe I was learning how to carry my pain without letting it poison me. Carl Jung talked about the process of individuation, becoming whole by integrating every part of yourself, even the ones you're ashamed of. I used to think wholeness meant perfection. Now I know it means honesty. It means saying, yeah, that hurt, and not pretending otherwise. It means not needing to be the strong one all the time. I started letting people in, real ones, friends who didn't flinch at my silence, who didn't need me to be okay to stay. People who sat with me on my bad days and celebrated me on my good ones, without needing an explanation. And slowly, I stopped performing even in front of myself. I stopped writing narratives to justify his behavior. I stopped blaming myself for not being enough. I stopped telling myself I should have seen it coming, should have done something differently, should have been someone else entirely, because the truth is, I was exactly who I needed to be. Even in the mess, even in the heartbreak, even in the silence. Especially in the silence. You know, there's this moment that still comes back to me sometimes. The way his eyes looked when he said it. I still love her. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't angry, it was tired, defeated. Like he had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and for the first time, he let it drop. And I've wondered, what if he was trapped too? What if he didn't know how to leave? What if he thought he was doing the right thing until he couldn't fake it anymore? That doesn't excuse it, it doesn't erase the damage, but it does something even more powerful. It humanizes the pain. Because when you stop making someone the villain, you stop being the victim. You become something else entirely free, free to see the story for what it was, free to own your part in it, free to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. Because carrying bitterness is too expensive when your soul is trying to heal. So I forgave him, not out loud, not in a dramatic text or letter, but quietly, in the stillness of my room, one night when I realized I didn't want to feel like a prisoner anymore. "I forgive you," I whispered into the air. And maybe it didn't reach him, but it reached me, and that was enough. Carl Jung believed that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about releasing its grip on your present. And that's what I did. I let go of the altar, the whispers, the weight of the ring I never wore again. I made space, and in that space, something new started to grow. It began with small joys, laughing at a joke I would have ignored, singing in the car, reading poetry aloud. Things that didn't feel significant until I realized they were me returning to myself. One morning I woke up and the first thought that came to my mind wasn't about him. It wasn't about the pain. It was about breakfast. And it sounds silly, but I smiled. Because when your first thought is scrambled eggs instead of sorrow, that's a sign. That's progress. That's life moving forward, even if you didn't ask it to. And there was another moment, months later, when I saw him again. It was accidental. At a cafe. He didn't see me at first. I had a book in my hand, coffee in the other, and I was laughing at something my friend had said. And when he looked up, our eyes met, just for a second, and I saw it, the recognition, the regret, the softness, maybe even the apology he never spoke. And you know what I felt? Nothing, not anger, not love, not loss, just neutrality. And that, more than anything, told me how far I'd come. Because healing isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet absence of pain where pain used to live. That night I went home and wrote in my journal, "I think I'm okay." And I meant it. You don't realize how strong you've become until you stop trying to prove it. Until you're just living, breathing, laughing, without needing permission or applause. Carl Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." I read that quote over and over in those months, because it reminded me that I wasn't broken. I was awakening. I wasn't lost. I was remembering. And I wasn't too much. I was just enough for the life I hadn't lived yet. And so I kept going. Not perfectly, not always gracefully, but honestly. And that honesty became my compass. It guided me through new friendships, new boundaries, new love for myself. And eventually, yes, even new love from someone else. But that's not the point of this story. This story isn't about finding someone new. It's about finding the self I had buried beneath years of pretending. It's about the girl at the altar who chose silence over spectacle, dignity over drama, truth over illusion. It's about the woman who rose from that silence, not as a victim, not as a warrior, but as herself. You don't wake up one day suddenly healed. Healing is not a line you cross. It's a rhythm, a back and forth. Some days the past pulls you under like a wave you didn't see coming. Other days you swim stronger. And then one day you realize you're floating. I remember that day so clearly. It wasn't dramatic. I was walking home from the grocery store. The sky was grey, but the wind was gentle. I had forgotten my headphones, so it was just me and the sound of my own breath. And it hit me. I wasn't carrying it anymore. The weight, the tension, the memory, it was still there, yes, but it wasn't on my back, it was behind me where it belonged. That's what growth looks like. Not forgetting, not pretending it didn't matter, but learning how to carry the memory without letting it carry you. I think back to who I was at that altar, standing in lace and light, trembling on the inside, and I want to tell her, you did it. You walked away. You trusted your silence more than his lie. You believed in the truth of your bones when the world wanted a show. That version of me deserved more, but she also gave me more than I knew at the time. She gave me the starting point, the line in the sand, the rupture that became the rebirth. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And I've come to understand what that means. Not accepting just the polished parts, but the angry parts, the needy parts, the scared, reactive, insecure parts. The parts that cry at 2 a.m. and text people they shouldn't. The parts we hide when we're trying to seem okay. Because those parts, they're not proof that you're unlovable. They're proof that you're alive, that you've lived, that you've dared to care deeply. And caring is not weakness, it's risk, it's bravery. One of the hardest things I had to learn after the altar was how to let good things in again. Because when you've been shattered, your body starts guarding everything. Every smile feels suspicious. Every compliment feels loaded. Every invitation feels like a setup. But slowly, I started saying yes again. To dinner with friends, to weekends out of town, to laughter, real laughter. The kind that starts deep in your belly and makes you forget what you were worried about. There was this one night we were at a rooftop bar, music playing, lights soft, and someone said something that made me laugh so hard I cried. And in the middle of all that, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked happy, not pretending, not performing, just real. And that's when I realized I hadn't just survived that day at the altar. I had built something new from its ashes, something stronger, something honest, a life that fit me, a life where I didn't have to shrink or beg or bend. And I know now there was no other way for this story to go. Because if he hadn't said it, I would have kept performing. I would have said my vows with a full heart and an empty truth. I would have signed a marriage built on absence, and eventually I would have broken under the weight of pretending. So, in a strange way, I'm grateful, not for the pain, but for the clarity, for the moment everything cracked and let the light in, for the silence that gave me back my voice. Carl Jung believed that life calls us through crises, that the breakdown is the summons. And now I see it clearly. That moment at the altar wasn't just a betrayal, it was a door, a harsh one, a violent one, but a door nonetheless. And I walked through it, and what I found on the other side wasn't just healing, it was wholeness. It was knowing that I'm allowed to take up space, that my needs are not inconvenient, that my love is not too much, that I don't have to shapeshift to be wanted. I want that for you too. If you're still here, if you're listening to this and some part of your chest feels heavy, if something in you is whispering, "This is me," I want you to hear this. You are not alone. Your story may not look like mine. Maybe no one whispered at your altar. Maybe the betrayal came quietly over years. Maybe it came loud and fast. But however it came, I want you to know your truth matters. You don't need an audience to validate your pain. You don't need permission to leave what hurts. You don't need to earn love by disappearing. You are allowed to be the loudest voice in your own life. Carl Jung said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." And that's what healing is. It's not about erasing the past. It's about meeting yourself again and again at every stage, and choosing love each time. Not love for them, love for you. So write the letter, burn the shirt, play the song, say the thing you've been holding in for years. Let it out. Let it breathe. Let yourself be seen by you first. I still have the dress, not because I want to remember him, but because I want to remember her, the version of me that stood at the altar and chose truth. One day I'll donate it maybe, or repurpose it into something else. But for now it hangs quietly in the back of my closet, a soft reminder. This is where the fire started. And the fire, it didn't consume me. It awakened me. There's a kind of freedom that comes after the fire. Not the frantic kind, not the performative kind, but the quiet, grounded kind. The kind that makes you breathe deeper without even realizing it. The kind that lives in your bones and doesn't need to be announced. That's the freedom I live with now. I don't walk around with walls up or bitterness etched into my skin. I don't need to explain myself to anyone. I don't tell that story to gain sympathy or applause. I tell it because someone out there is still standing at their own altar, shaking, unsure, holding on to a dream that's already disintegrating. And I want them to know you're allowed to leave. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say no, even if you already said yes. You're allowed to reclaim your voice at any moment, especially in the middle of the silence. Carl Jung believed that the wound is the place where the light enters you. I used to think that was poetic. Now I know it's true. That moment at the altar split me wide open, and through that split everything poured out. The lies, the fear, the denial, the self-abandonment. But something else poured in. Light, awareness, power. That light didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived slowly, gently, and now it's part of me. And the most beautiful part? I've stopped trying to prove anything. I don't need someone to pick me to feel worthy. I don't need a ring to feel committed to my life. I don't need a perfect story to be whole. I've already chosen me. And that choice changes everything. It changes how I walk into rooms. It changes how I speak. It changes how I let people love me. It changes how I forgive, not to forget, but to move forward. It changes how I say no, how I say yes, how I sit with myself in the quiet and no longer feel afraid. It changes how I live, because now I live from truth, not from fear. So if you're still listening, if this story has echoed anywhere in your heart, I want to leave you with this. Your pain is real. Your silence is sacred. Your truth is powerful. And your healing is already happening. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to package it beautifully. You just need to stay awake, stay honest, stay present. That's how we become. That's how we rise. There's a version of you waiting on the other side of this story, a version that doesn't settle, doesn't beg, doesn't shrink, a version that knows she is worthy without performance, a version that isn't afraid to be seen exactly as she is. Let her come. Let her speak. Let her take your hand and walk you home. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Let that live in you. Let that become your anchor. Let that become the doorway through which you step every day, no matter how dark the night before was. And now, before this ends, I want to ask something of you. Not as a script, not as an algorithm, but as someone who's been there, who's still learning, still unfolding, still choosing herself day after day. If this spoke to you, if even one sentence held a mirror to your life, I invite you to do 3 things. First, comment below. Tell me which part echoed in you. I read every word, and your story matters here. Second, subscribe, not just to this channel, but to yourself, to your healing, to your becoming. Because the more we choose our own truth, the more we give others permission to do the same. And third, share this. Send it to someone who needs to hear it, someone who's still holding a ring in their hand, afraid to let go. You never know whose life it might shift. And above all, keep going. Even when it's messy, even when it's silent, even when it hurts, keep going. Because you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become.